Hey everyone. I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. The knife glides through the chicken breast with a steady precision, the rhythmic slicing almost soothing. It's a routine. Dinner at 7:30, the same meal rotation every week, the same rituals that used to define our life together. Used to. Something's off tonight. I can feel it, like a low hum of static in the background, barely there but impossible to ignore. The house is quiet. Too quiet. I listen for Lauren upstairs. She's been in the bedroom for over an hour now, claiming a migraine. But I can still hear the occasional buzz of her phone, the too frequent clicks of the screen lighting up. There was a time when I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but that time's passed. Something has changed, something between us, and I don't know when it started. I can't pinpoint the exact moment the distance crept in, but I feel it now, stretching like a widening gulf between us. I finish prepping the chicken, drop it into the sizzling pan, and wipe my hands on the towel hanging from the oven door. I glance at my phone out of habit, hoping for a distraction from the tension gnawing at me, but the screen is empty. No texts, no missed calls, just silence. I pour a glass of wine, swirling it absent-mindedly as I watch the chicken brown, and I can't shake the feeling that something is lurking just beyond the surface. Lauren's laughter drifts down from upstairs, light but forced, too high-pitched. I freeze mid-pour, gripping the neck of the bottle a little too tightly. She's talking to someone. The conversation is muffled, probably a phone call, but there's a familiarity in her voice that I don't like. I try to tell myself it's nothing. Maybe she's just talking to a friend. But my stomach tightens, and I know better than to believe my own lies. I set the wine down and move toward the stairs, my footsteps soft on the hardwood. Halfway up, I stop. Her laughter cuts off abruptly, like she knows I'm here, like she's been caught. There's a brief pause, and then the unmistakable sound of her phone screen locking, the click sharper in the heavy silence that follows. "Dinner's ready?" I call, my voice steady despite the tension wrapping around my chest. "Coming," she replies, too quickly, too easily. I head back downstairs, shaking my head. She'll come down, and we'll eat in silence like we have been for weeks. But it's different now, isn't it? It's not just the silence, it's the coldness, the avoidance. And the passive aggression, tiny, cutting remarks that slip out of her mouth before she can stop them, followed by a quick, dismissive smile as if she's just joking. But she isn't. She enters the kitchen a few minutes later, moving casually, almost too casually, as if nothing's wrong. She slides into the chair across from me, her phone in hand, face lit by the glow of the screen. She doesn't look at me, doesn't say a word, just scrolls, eyes flicking up and down, the occasional half-smile ghosting across her lips as her thumbs work the screen. We eat in near silence, the clink of silverware on plates the only sound between us. I wait for her to say something, anything. Maybe talk about her day or ask about mine. But she doesn't. She hasn't asked me about work in days, maybe weeks. I used to tell her everything about the stress at the office, the pressure from the board, the constant demands to keep up productivity. But now, the words stick in my throat. I don't even want to share anymore. What would be the point? I take a breath, steadying myself. "How's work been?" I ask, trying to break through the wall between us, even though I know the answer won't satisfy me. She shrugs without looking up. "Fine. Fine. Always fine." It's a word that means nothing but hides everything. I set my fork down, appetite gone. The tension between us is unbearable, but I push it aside, letting the rest of dinner pass in strained silence. She finishes quickly, stands, and mutters something about needing to go back upstairs to lie down, the migraine back again. She's gone before I can respond. After clearing the table, I stand at the sink, the water running over my hands, too hot, but I let it scald me for a moment. I stare out the window into the darkened backyard, and I can't help but wonder what happened to us. 9 years of marriage, and now it feels like we're strangers. She's slipping away, and I don't know how to stop it, or if I even want to anymore. My phone buzzes in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. I dry my hands and check the screen. An email from my boss, Frank Peterson, about the work party tomorrow night. He's always throwing these events, probably to keep morale up, but it's not exactly my scene. Still, I know I have to go, and Lauren will want to come. She always enjoys those events, maybe a little too much. As I lay in bed that night, Lauren beside me, already turned away. I can't sleep. My mind keeps going back to her laughter upstairs, the sudden silence when she realized I was listening, the way she never looks at me anymore. And then there are the comments, tiny, insignificant things she said in passing, but they've stuck with me. Like the time she said Frank was funny, or how she's been mentioning how successful he is, how he's going places. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, those words are on a loop in my head, growing louder and more pointed by the minute. I close my eyes, trying to will myself into sleep, but it doesn't come. There's something here, something I'm missing, and the unease in my chest feels heavier tonight. I tell myself it's just stress. Work's been brutal lately, and Lauren, well, maybe we're just going through a rough patch. Every couple does, right? But even as I think it, I don't believe it. The next day at work, I'm distracted. I run through the motions, meetings, emails, reports, but it all blurs together. My mind keeps drifting back to last night, to Lauren. By the time I head home to get ready for Frank's party, I'm wound tight, every nerve on edge. I try to push it down, act normal. I have to act normal. We arrive at the party and Lauren immediately blends into the crowd, effortlessly charming everyone around her. I watch her from a distance, a drink in my hand, as she laughs too loudly at something Frank says. He's standing a little too close, his hand brushing her arm in a way that feels too familiar. My stomach twists, but I force a smile when she glances my way. I tell myself not to overthink it. It's just Frank. He's always like this, overly friendly, a little touchy with everyone. But it's the way Lauren responds that gnaws at me. The way she tilts her head just so, the way she leans into his words, her laughter bubbling up in a way that hasn't been for me in months. I can't take my eyes off them, every small gesture and glance playing like a slow-motion car crash in front of me. Hours pass, and the party begins to wind down, but the image of them together, too close, lingers in my mind. I can't shake it. I shouldn't have come here. I should have stayed home, told her to go alone, spared myself the sight of whatever this is becoming. But now, it's too late. On the drive home, the silence between us is thick, suffocating. I grip the steering wheel, knuckles white, trying to keep my thoughts in check, but it's like holding back a flood. Lauren is staring out the window, lost in her own world. I want to ask her what's going on. I want to confront her, ask why she's been so distant, why she was so comfortable with Frank tonight. But the words die in my throat, replaced by something darker. By the time we pull into the driveway, the tension is a physical weight pressing down on my chest. We walk inside and Lauren heads straight upstairs without a word, leaving me standing alone in the dimly lit living room, drowning in my own thoughts. I don't follow her. Instead, I sit on the edge of the couch, staring blankly at the darkened TV screen, the silence around me oppressive. Something is wrong, more than wrong. I know it now, deep in my bones. I've felt it for weeks, maybe months, but tonight was the tipping point. The way she looked at Frank, the way she barely looks at me anymore. I stand and head upstairs, but when I reach our bedroom, the door is already closed. I hesitate for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob before turning away. There's no point in confronting her tonight. She'll just deny it, brush it off like she always does. And then there'll be more silence, more avoidance. I lie down in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Something is coming. I can feel it in the pit of my stomach, a storm brewing on the horizon. Whatever it is, it's going to tear everything apart. The next few days are a blur, but my mind is stuck in one place, Lauren. I'm hyper-aware of her now. Every movement, every word, every damn glance she throws my way or avoids throwing my way. The silence between us has thickened into something suffocating, but we're still pretending. We still play the game. Good husband, attentive wife, smiling couple. But I can't stop replaying that night at Frank's party. I see the way they interacted, how her body language shifted when she was near him, the casual touches that weren't so casual. And Frank, he's always been a little too friendly, but this time it felt different, too personal, too intimate. I try to push it out of my mind, but the seed's already planted. The more I try to ignore it, the more it grows, wrapping its roots around every thought, every moment I spend near her. And Lauren? She's oblivious. Or maybe she just doesn't care. She still spends hours on her phone, still locks it the moment I walk into the room. She's never been so secretive before. It's always on silent, always just out of my reach. I tell myself to stop obsessing, but the truth is I can't. She's been distant for weeks, months maybe. But now, it's more than just distance. It's a coldness that wasn't there before, a kind of casual indifference that cuts deeper than I expected. Every time she laughs at something on her phone, I feel my stomach churn. There's a part of me that wants to grab it, demand answers, but another part of me is too afraid of what I'll find. So I sit with it, this growing suspicion that's eating me alive. Saturday morning, I wake up early, long before Lauren. She's still curled up on her side of the bed, back to me, her phone clutched in her hand even while she sleeps. I get dressed quietly and leave the house, needing air, space, anything to clear my head. I drive without a destination in mind, letting the road take me wherever it wants. But no matter how far I go, I can't outrun the knot in my chest. Something's wrong. I know it now. I knew it before, but I've been pretending, because if I admit it, really admit it, I'll have to do something about it. The day passes slowly. I spend most of it avoiding home, making excuses to stay out, running errands I don't need to run. I text Lauren once around noon to let her know I'll be home later. She replies with a short K. That's it. No question about where I am, no concern, no warmth, just a letter. The knot tightens. When I get back, she's in the bathroom getting ready. I hear the faint hum of her hairdryer, the clatter of makeup containers. She doesn't ask me where I've been, doesn't even look up when I walk by the doorway, just keeps working on her appearance. It strikes me then, this is new. She never used to care this much about how she looked, not unless we were going out. But lately, it's like she's always dressing for someone else, someone who isn't me. That night, I try again. I ask her if she wants to watch a movie. It's a simple offer, something we used to do without thinking, but now it feels loaded. She barely glances up from her phone, her expression unreadable. I'm tired, Ethan, maybe tomorrow. Another lie. She's not tired, she just doesn't want to be around me. I can see it in the way she shrugs me off, like I'm an inconvenience. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes. The distance between us widens, and I don't know how to close it, or if I even should anymore. I've stopped talking about work, stopped sharing the little details of my day. What's the point? She's not listening anyway. And I've stopped asking her about hers because every answer is the same. Fine. It's like she's not even trying anymore. Like she's not even pretending to care. A few days later, I'm at work, sitting through yet another pointless meeting when my phone buzzes with an email notification. I glance at the screen, expecting another corporate memo, but it's from Frank. The subject line is short, direct. Can we talk? I open the email, and my pulse quickens as I read the contents. Frank wants to meet, but not in the office. He suggests a bar nearby, one that's a little more discreet. My gut clenches. Why the secrecy? Why not just call me into his office like he usually does? I can feel the tension building in my chest as I tap out a quick reply, agreeing to meet him after work. The rest of the day crawls by. I'm not even paying attention during meetings, my mind spinning with possibilities. What does Frank want? Does this have something to do with Lauren? I try to stay calm, but by the time I get to the bar, my nerves are shot. Frank is already there, sitting in a booth in the back, nursing a drink. He smiles when he sees me, but it's not his usual friendly smile. It's tight, calculated. I slide into the booth across from him, my mind racing. I've barely had time to order a drink when he leans in, his voice low. Ethan, I'm going to be blunt with you. I've got an offer for you, and I want you to hear me out before you say anything. I nod, but my heart is pounding now. my gut telling me I'm not going to like what he's about to say. Frank takes a sip of his drink, then continues, his tone too casual for the gravity of what he's offering. I've been spending time with Lauren, I'm sure you've noticed. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I stay silent, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Frank doesn't stop, doesn't even hesitate. She's interested in me. I'm not trying to be a dick here, Ethan, but it's clear things between you two aren't what they used to be. I swallow hard, my mouth dry, but I can't speak, can't move. So here's what I'm offering. I'll make it worth your while. A little cash, maybe some connections in the industry. All I'm asking is that you let her go. Let us be. It's a win-win. You get some compensation, and I get what I want. What do you say? I don't know how long I sit there, staring at him, my mind a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and something darker I can't name. His words hang in the air like a poisonous cloud. Let her go, just like that. As if she's a commodity, something he can buy, something I can sell. I stand up without saying a word, my legs shaky, but steady enough to walk out of the bar. I don't look back at Frank, don't give him the satisfaction of seeing my reaction. But inside, I'm crumbling. I drive home in a daze, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, my thoughts spinning in 100 different directions. When I get home, Lauren is sitting on the couch, her phone in hand, as usual. She glances up when I walk in, but says nothing, her expression neutral. She knows. She has to know. I stand in the doorway, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to confront her, to demand answers. But instead I hear myself say, "We need to talk." She raises an eyebrow, still scrolling. About what? My anger flares, but I push it down, forcing myself to stay calm. About Frank. The name alone is enough to make her freeze, her fingers hovering over the screen for a second too long before she sets her phone down. She doesn't say anything at first, but the silence between us is enough. It's an admission all on its own. I sit down across from her, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. He made me an offer today. Told me he's been spending time with you, that you're interested in him. He offered me money, Lauren, to just let it happen, to let you go. Is that what you want? Her expression doesn't change. If anything, she looks bored, like this conversation is just an inconvenience. It's not about the money, Ethan, she says, her voice cold, detached. He's better than you, better in bed, better in life. He has more to offer. I'm done pretending that what we have is enough. Her words slice through me, sharper than any knife. She says them so easily, so casually, like she's talking about the weather, not tearing our marriage apart. There's no regret, no remorse, just indifference. I feel my chest tighten, the anger I've been holding back rising to the surface. So that's it? 9 years and you just throw it all away for someone who can offer you more? Lauren shrugs, her gaze cold. It's not like you're doing anything to keep me around. We've been dead for a long time, Ethan. You just didn't want to see it. I can't breathe. The room feels like it's closing in on me, the weight of her words pressing down until I feel like I'm drowning. But there's something else rising in me now, something colder than anger. I stand up, my voice low, controlled. You're going to regret this. She smirks, a cruel twist of her lips. Doubt it. I walk out of the room, out of the house, my heart pounding. But my mind is already working, already planning. She's wrong. She will regret this. Both of them will, and I'll make sure of it. I sat in my car, staring out at the empty driveway, my hands still trembling on the steering wheel. The heat of the confrontation with Lauren simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over again. But I held it down, forcing myself to breathe, forcing my mind to focus. There was no room for emotion now. Emotion was a liability. I had to think clearly, logically. Revenge wasn't something to act on in a rage, it was something to plan, something to savor. I couldn't get her words out of my head. He's better than you. Better in bed, better in life. That smug look on her face, as if she was untouchable, as if I wasn't even worth the effort of a real argument. Frank had her wrapped around his finger, and she didn't care if I knew it. They thought they'd won already. They were counting on me to fall apart, to slink away quietly like a kicked dog. But they didn't know me, not really. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. If they wanted to play this game, I'd show them just how dangerous it could get. First, I needed to understand the playing field. Lauren's affair wasn't just about sex. It was about money, power, Frank's influence. That's what she wanted, the life she thought he could give her. Fine, let her dream about it, because soon I'd be tearing it all down around her. I spent the next few days laying low, pretending to play along. I kissed her on the cheek when I left for work, ate dinner with her in silence, kept my eyes on the TV as she texted furiously next to me. I could feel the tension in the air between us, but I masked it well. I let her believe she was in control, but when I wasn't home, I was digging. I spent hours researching Frank's company, combing through public records, old financial reports. He had a reputation as a golden boy in the industry, but I knew better. Men like Frank didn't climb to the top without getting their hands dirty. All I needed was one loose thread to unravel his carefully constructed empire. Then, I found it. A series of offshore accounts, hidden under shell companies that had no legitimate business. The numbers didn't add up. He was siphoning money, lots of it. Millions, maybe. It was all tucked away in small, untraceable amounts, spread across different banks in different countries. But with enough time, enough patience, I started connecting the dots. If I could expose him, it wouldn't just ruin him, it would destroy him. Financial ruin, legal trouble, public humiliation. I could take everything from him. I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of control I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't just about Lauren anymore. This was about Frank, too. He thought he could buy me off, thought he could walk into my life, take what was mine, and leave me to rot. But he was wrong. I wasn't the weak man they both thought I was, and I was going to prove it. As I started piecing together my plan, I also began to watch Lauren more carefully. She didn't think I noticed the way she slipped out of bed earlier than usual, how she spent more time on her phone than she did talking to me. But I saw everything. I didn't ask questions, didn't confront her. I let her believe she was getting away with it. All the while, I tracked her every move. She'd gotten careless. Maybe she thought I was too beaten down to notice, but her little secrets were becoming easier to spot. I installed a tracking app on her phone, syncing it to mine so I could see exactly where she went during the day. When she told me she was running errands, I knew she was really meeting Frank. Their little hotel rendezvous wasn't hard to figure out. I let them have their fun. The more they thought they were getting away with it, the harder it would hit when I brought the hammer down. As my plan took shape, a complication arose. Frank wasn't just involved in petty financial tricks. He was neck-deep in some seriously illegal business. Money laundering, tax evasion, maybe even worse. It was bigger than I expected, and that made it more dangerous. If I wasn't careful, I could end up tangled in his mess. If Frank caught wind of what I was digging into, he'd come after me. And not in the corporate sense. This was a man who had too much to lose, a man who wouldn't hesitate to protect himself, no matter the cost. I wasn't afraid. Not yet. The danger only made it more satisfying. If I played this right, I wouldn't just expose Frank's infidelity. I'd take down his entire world. But as I dug deeper into Frank's business, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just that Lauren had been cheating. She'd been helping him. The offshore accounts were linked to a few personal expenses that I recognized, trips Lauren had taken under the guise of girls' weekends, expensive purchases that didn't match our budget. Frank had been funneling money through her, using her as part of his scheme. And Lauren wasn't just some innocent pawn. She was in on it. They were both planning to ruin me financially, to leave me with nothing. The realization hit me like a freight train. Lauren hadn't just betrayed me with her body. She'd been planning this with him for months, maybe even longer. They were going to clean me out, leave me with nothing, and walk off into the sunset together. That's what this was all about. Not just love, not just sex. It was about power, control, and money. Something inside me shifted then, hardening into something cold, immovable. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. If I didn't act fast, they would leave me ruined, both professionally and personally. They'd take everything. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I gathered as much evidence as I could, copying files, recording conversations, setting traps. I knew I couldn't just confront Frank or Lauren. Not yet. That would be too easy, too quick. No, I wanted to watch them burn. I wanted them to feel the walls closing in, to know that everything they'd built together was about to collapse. I started laying the groundwork for Frank's downfall. It had to be slow, methodical, just like the way they tried to dismantle me. I planted a few breadcrumbs, making sure the right people would find them. Frank had enemies, rivals in the business who'd love nothing more than to see him fall. I knew where to leak the financial records, where to leave a trail that would lead back to him. At home, I continued to play the part of the clueless husband. Lauren still thought I was none the wiser, still snuck off to her little rendezvous with Frank. I smiled at her, kissed her on the cheek, let her believe she was winning. But every time she walked out the door, I felt the cold satisfaction of knowing what was coming. And then, one night, I sat her down. We were at the dinner table, the house silent except for the occasional clink of our forks against the plates. She hadn't looked me in the eye for days, maybe weeks, and that night was no different. I cleared my throat, setting my fork down with deliberate care. "Lauren," I said, my voice calm, controlled. "We need to talk." She didn't even flinch. She just kept cutting her steak, chewing slowly, as if I hadn't said a word. I waited for her to finish her bite before I continued. "I know about Frank." This time she froze. The knife in her hand hovered just above her plate, her eyes flicking up to meet mine for the first time in what felt like forever. But her expression quickly hardened. "So?" I smiled, a tight, humorless smile. "I know everything, the money, the offshore accounts, all of it." "You've been helping him, haven't you?" She dropped her fork, the metal clattering loudly against the plate. For the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely shocked. "How the hell?" I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. "I've been tracking everything, Lauren. I know what you and Frank have been up to. You're both going down for this." Her face twisted into a sneer, but I could see the fear behind her eyes. "You think you can do anything? Frank owns half this city. He'll bury you." I shook my head, the calm stillness inside me settling deeper. "He can try. But I'm not the one with my name on the bank accounts. You are. When this all comes crashing down, it's going to land on you just as hard as it lands on him." She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I said, pulling my phone from my pocket, showing her the records I'd collected, the emails, the transfers. Her eyes widened as she took it in, her bravado faltering. "It's over, Lauren." She didn't speak, just stood there, her face pale and blank. "You'll regret it," I said softly, my voice low, almost a whisper. "You'll regret everything." And I meant it. As she stormed out of the room, I felt nothing. No sadness, no guilt, just the cold satisfaction of knowing that the next move was mine. The next morning, I put the final pieces of my plan in motion. Frank's world was built on lies, and it wouldn't take much to expose them. The offshore accounts, the tax evasion, it was all there, hiding in plain sight. But taking him down required precision. One wrong move, and it would all fall apart. Frank wasn't just rich, he was powerful. Men like him didn't go down easily. They fought back, and they fought dirty. But I was ready. I spent hours meticulously crafting anonymous emails, attaching the evidence I'd gathered. Bank statements, shell company transactions, all neatly laid out for anyone willing to dig. I sent them to the media, to a few key business rivals of Frank's who would be more than happy to bury him. And then I waited. The first crack appeared a few days later. A small article buried in the financial section of the local paper, questioning irregularities in Frank's company finances. It was enough to raise eyebrows, but not enough to start a firestorm. I knew it would take time for the pieces to fall into place, but once they did, it would be unstoppable. The media loved a scandal, and Frank Peterson was about to become headline news. At home, I continued playing the part. I let Lauren think I was none the wiser, let her go about her daily routine of deceit. Every time she left the house, I watched her go with a cold, detached satisfaction. She was walking straight into the trap I'd set, and she didn't even know it. A few days after the article appeared, I noticed a shift. Lauren seemed more anxious, more on edge. She wasn't as quick with her cutting remarks, and she spent even more time glued to her phone, as if waiting for something. Frank must have told her about the article, must have warned her that things were starting to unravel, but she didn't say a word to me. I kept my distance, playing the part of the oblivious husband all the while tracking every move she made. Every text, every call, every whispered conversation was one more nail in her coffin. The more frantic she became, the closer I got to finishing what I'd started. It wasn't long before the cracks turned into fissures. Another article appeared, this one with more detail. There were whispers of an investigation, rumors that the authorities were looking into Frank's business dealings. His name started appearing in financial blogs, then in mainstream news outlets. Every day, the pressure mounted, and then one evening it all came crashing down. I was sitting on the couch pretending to watch TV when Lauren walked in. She'd been out all day, meeting with Frank, no doubt. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with barely concealed panic. She didn't even acknowledge me as she dropped her bag on the floor and stormed upstairs. I waited for a few minutes, listening to the muffled sounds of her pacing back and forth in the bedroom. I turned off the TV and followed her upstairs. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone clutched in her hand, her knuckles white. She looked up at me, her expression a mix of anger and fear. "Something's happening," she said, her voice low, trembling. "Frank's in trouble. Big trouble." I leaned against the doorway, crossing my arms. "What kind of trouble?" She shot me a look of pure venom. "You know damn well what kind of trouble. Don't play dumb, Ethan. You're involved in this somehow. I know it." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I don't know what you're talking about, Lauren. But maybe you should have thought about that before you and Frank decided to screw me over." Her face flushed with anger, but behind it, I could see the fear growing. She knew. She finally understood that I wasn't the weak, clueless husband she thought I was. "You think this is funny?" she spat, standing up, her fists clenched at her sides. "You're going to ruin everything. You'll destroy us both." "Us?" I laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "There hasn't been an us for a long time. You made sure of that when you got into bed with Frank." "Literally." She flinched at my words but didn't back down. "You're going to regret this, Ethan. Frank will come after you. He's not going to let this slide." I shrugged, stepping closer, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "Frank's finished. He just doesn't know it yet." The fear in her eyes deepened. She backed away, sitting down on the bed, her phone slipping from her grasp. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said, my voice calm, controlled. I just let the truth come out. Frank did the rest himself. It's only a matter of time before the authorities catch up with him, and when they do, you'll be right there with him. All that money you helped him hide, it's going to bury you both." She stared at me, her chest rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths. "You're lying." "I'm not." I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the headlines, showing her the articles. "It's all right here, Lauren. Every shady deal, every hidden account, they're going to come for him. And when they do, you'll be dragged down with him." For the first time in weeks, Lauren looked defeated. The mask she'd worn for so long was crumbling, her bravado shattered. She didn't say anything, just stared at the screen, her hands trembling. "I've filed for divorce," I said, my voice steady. "You'll get nothing. And by the time Frank's done fighting his legal battles, he'll have nothing to give you either. The life you thought you were going to have with him, it's gone." She looked up at me, her eyes wide, pleading, "Ethan, please." It was too late for that. The damage was done. I felt nothing as I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to sit in the wreckage of her own choices. Over the next few days, the chaos intensified. Frank's company crumbled under the weight of the investigation. More evidence came to light, more skeletons tumbled out of the closet. He was finished, his empire collapsing around him. The media tore him apart, exposing every dirty secret, every shady deal. His name was smeared across every headline, his face splashed on every news broadcast. And Lauren? She was dragged into it too. Her involvement in the money laundering, the hidden accounts, it all came out. She couldn't deny it, couldn't run from it. Her name was now synonymous with Frank's downfall, her reputation in tatters. I watched it all unfold from a distance, detached, methodical. Every article, every news segment was another step closer to their complete destruction. I didn't feel joy, didn't feel triumph, just cold satisfaction. They'd wanted to ruin me, but in the end they'd ruined themselves. One night I sat in the living room watching the news. Frank had been arrested, his smug face replaced with a mugshot, his hands cuffed behind his back. He looked pale, haggard, like a man who knew his time was up. The reporter's voice droned on about the charges: fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. He was looking at years in prison, maybe decades. I turned off the TV, leaning back on the couch, the silence settling around me. It was over. Frank was done. Lauren's future was in ruins, and I had won. But as I sat there, the cold satisfaction I'd expected didn't come. I'd imagined this moment for so long, what it would feel like to watch them fall, to see their lives collapse. But now that it had finally happened, all I felt was nothing. I stood up, walking to the window, staring out at the darkened street. The house was quiet, too quiet. Lauren was gone, her things packed up, the divorce papers signed. There was no one left to fight, no one left to hate. I was alone, completely, utterly alone. I had my victory, but at what cost? The life I'd known was gone. The woman I'd loved had betrayed me, and now she was out of my life for good. Frank was in jail, his empire in shambles, but the emptiness inside me remained. I'd thought revenge would fill that void, would give me closure. But now, standing in the darkened house, I realized that it hadn't. The cold satisfaction I'd felt had been fleeting, a temporary fix for a much deeper wound. And now, I was left with nothing but the silence. The phone buzzed on the table, a news alert flashing across the screen. Another update on Frank's case, no doubt. I didn't bother looking at it. I already knew how it would end. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, the weight of my victory settling over me like a shroud. I had won, but somehow it didn't feel like a victory at all. I was free of Lauren, free of Frank, but I was also free of the life I'd once had. The man I'd been before all of this, the man who had loved his wife, who had built a life around her, was gone. And in his place was someone colder, harder, someone who had gotten his revenge but paid a price he hadn't anticipated. As I stared into the darkness, I realized that this was the true cost of my justice, and I had no one left to share it with. Frank's empire had crumbled, his life now defined by legal fees, court dates, and the glaring spotlight of media scrutiny. The investigation into his financial misconduct widened every day, with new layers of corruption revealed in the press. The man who'd once swaggered around the office, secure in his power and wealth, was now a cautionary tale. His fall from grace was total, swift, and merciless. Lauren's world, too, had disintegrated. She had gone from a woman who thought she'd secured a future of luxury to someone entangled in a scandal, her name sullied beyond repair. The divorce had been quick, almost businesslike. I made sure she left with nothing. The prenup had been ironclad, and with the mountain of legal trouble she faced for her role in Frank's schemes, her life of comfort and privilege had evaporated. She was left clinging to scraps, her reputation destroyed, her dreams shattered. I should have felt victorious. After all, I'd achieved what I set out to do. I'd torn them apart, exposed their lies, and ensured they would never rebuild. But as the dust settled, something else began to gnaw at me, something cold and unsettling. The calls started to come less frequently. Friends who once checked in, who asked me how I was holding up, had drifted away. Maybe they sensed something in me, a change, a shift that made them uncomfortable. Or maybe it was the stories, the whispers at work about how I'd seemed too calm, too methodical during the whole ordeal. People had a way of romanticizing breakdowns, of wanting to see grief and pain on full display, like it validated the hurt. But I hadn't given them that. I'd been controlled, precise, and that made them uneasy. At work, things felt different too. Colleagues who used to admire my work ethic now seemed wary, as if they couldn't quite look me in the eye. My boss, Frank's replacement, kept his distance, treating me with a mixture of respect and caution. The new management team had restructured the company after Frank's departure, and while I was still part of the team, I wasn't included in the key decisions anymore. The whispers at meetings, the closed-door discussions, it all felt detached, like they were keeping me at arm's length. I knew why. They were afraid of how I'd handled everything, afraid of the lengths I'd gone to in taking Frank down. And maybe, deep down, they wondered if they could trust me. The more time passed, the more isolated I became. I'd succeeded in burning their world down, but now I stood alone, surrounded by the ashes. The life I'd had with Lauren was gone. The life I'd had at work was slipping away too. I'd been so focused on my revenge, so fixated on destroying them, that I hadn't considered what would be left for me once it was over. The nights were the worst. The house, once filled with Lauren's presence, now felt like a tomb. The silence was oppressive, hanging in the air like a weight I couldn't lift. I tried to fill the space with distractions, TV, work, books, but nothing stuck. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing, reliving every moment of the past few months. I'd won. But I was still haunted by what that victory had cost me. One evening, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty side where Lauren used to sleep. It felt so far away now, those moments when we were happy, or at least I thought we were. The bed seemed bigger now, colder. The house was the same. Every corner of it reminded me of what I'd lost. Not just Lauren, but the version of myself that had existed before all of this began. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the stillness. It was a text from one of my few remaining friends asking if I wanted to grab a drink. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, but I didn't respond. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to sit in a bar and pretend that everything was fine, pretend that I was fine, because I wasn't. Not really. I set the phone back down and walked downstairs, feeling the weight of each step. The house was dark, the only light coming from the street lamps outside, casting long shadows across the living room. I poured myself a drink, the ice clinking softly in the glass, and sat on the couch, letting the quiet consume me. The news was on in the background, more updates about Frank's case. His face flashed on the screen, gaunt, tired, a man who had lost everything. A part of me wanted to feel satisfaction in that, to revel in his downfall, but all I felt was emptiness. I leaned back on the couch, the glass in my hand growing warm. The revenge I'd meticulously planned, the cold, calculated destruction of their lives, it had all played out exactly as I'd wanted. But it hadn't brought me the peace I'd expected. It hadn't filled the void inside me. I thought back to the night I'd confronted Lauren, the look on her face when I'd told her I knew everything, the way she'd pleaded with me at the end. I'd walked out of that room feeling nothing, as if she'd become a stranger to me. But now, in the stillness of the house, I couldn't shake the memory of the life we'd shared, the vacations, the laughter, the moments when we'd felt like a team. Somewhere along the way, we'd lost that. And no matter how much I blamed her for the affair, for her betrayal, I couldn't deny the fact that I had lost something too. I finished my drink and set the glass down, the sound echoing in the empty room. The house was too quiet, too still. It felt like it was closing in around me, the walls pressing down with the weight of all the choices I'd made. The divorce papers had come through a few weeks ago. It had been a clean break, as clean as these things could be. She had nothing left. Frank's legal troubles had drained her financially, and without him, she was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. I had no doubt she would land on her feet eventually. Lauren always found a way to survive, but it wouldn't be the life she'd imagined, not the life she'd betrayed me for. And me? I wasn't sure where that left me. I had my job, though it didn't feel the same. I had my house, though it felt more like a prison now. I had my revenge, but I didn't have the closure I'd been seeking. As the weeks passed, the emptiness inside me grew. I went through the motions of my life, but it all felt hollow. I'd thought that taking them down would give me a sense of justice, a sense of satisfaction, but all it had done was strip away the last remnants of the life I'd known, leaving me with nothing but the quiet. I started to feel it at work too, the subtle changes in how people interacted with me. The way conversations quieted when I entered the room, the side glances during meetings. It wasn't overt, but it was there, a distance that hadn't existed before. I tried to ignore it at first, tried to focus on the work, but it was impossible to miss. My boss called me into his office one afternoon, his expression carefully neutral. He was polite, professional, but the message was clear. I wasn't part of the long-term plan anymore. They were restructuring, he said, moving in a different direction. He thanked me for my contributions, shook my hand, and that was it. Just like that, the last connection I had to my old life was severed. I packed up my things and left the office, the weight of my empty future pressing down on me. The world outside felt distant, detached, as if I was moving through it without actually being part of it. The street was crowded, people bustling past me, but I felt completely alone. The house was waiting for me when I got home, dark and silent, just like always. I dropped my keys on the counter and stood there for a long moment, staring into the quiet. This was what I'd fought for, what I'd sacrificed everything for. But now, in the emptiness, I wasn't sure if it had been worth it. I sat down on the couch, my hands resting in my lap, the silence pressing in around me. The life I'd once had, the life I'd built with Lauren, was gone. I'd burned it all down, just like I'd planned. But now, sitting here in the aftermath, I realized that I wasn't the same person anymore. The man I'd been was gone too, consumed by the fire of revenge. The phone buzzed again on the table, another message I didn't feel like answering. I ignored it and leaned back, staring up at the ceiling. The quiet stretched on, heavy and oppressive, and for the first time I let myself feel the weight of it. I had won, but in winning, I had lost everything. I sat on the couch, bathed in the darkness of the room, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen the only sound. The glass in my hand was empty, but I didn't feel like getting up to pour another drink. I stared at the window, watching the faint orange glow of the streetlights cast long, stretching shadows across the floor. The house felt cavernous, hollow, as if it had swallowed up everything that once made it a home. I had destroyed Lauren and Frank. I had torn their lives apart piece by piece, just as they had done to me. Their betrayal had been swift and brutal, and my revenge had been calculated and methodical. I should have felt victorious. The man I had been, the man who spent sleepless nights in the agony of betrayal, would have relished this moment. But now that it was all done, now that I had reduced them to nothing, I felt only a vast emptiness. I had imagined this moment differently. I thought revenge would bring closure, that it would allow me to put everything behind me. I had envisioned walking away with a sense of finality, perhaps even satisfaction. But that was a fantasy. The truth of it was something colder, harder to swallow. Revenge hadn't healed me, it had only hollowed me out further. I leaned back, staring up at the ceiling, the dim light from outside flickering over the walls. The silence was suffocating, like a heavy fog settling over me, making it hard to breathe. The house was filled with echoes of the life I used to have, with Lauren's laughter, with the mundane sounds of daily life that I hadn't appreciated until they were gone. Now all that was left was this eerie, oppressive quiet. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind wouldn't stop racing, replaying the events of the last few months over and over. It felt like I was caught in a loop, unable to escape the decisions I had made, the person I had become. I had told myself that everything I did was justified, that I was simply taking back control. But now, looking back, I wasn't so sure. I had lost so much more than Lauren and Frank, more than I ever realized I could lose. I had lost my sense of self. Revenge had consumed me. It had become my sole focus, my reason for getting out of bed in the morning. I had poured every ounce of energy into crafting their downfall, ensuring that neither of them would ever recover. And now that I had succeeded, I didn't know what to do with myself. There was no next step, no new goal to strive for. The anger that had once fueled me had burned out, leaving behind a vast, desolate emptiness. The phone buzzed again on the coffee table, vibrating against the wood with a low hum. I ignored it. I knew who it was. The same people who had tried to reach out, who had been there at the start of it all, offering sympathy and a listening ear. But I didn't need sympathy anymore. I didn't want anyone's pity. What could they say to me now anyway? What would it change? I had crossed a line that none of them understood, and I didn't want to explain it. I had no regrets about what I'd done to Lauren and Frank. They had deserved every ounce of the pain I inflicted on them, but I hadn't anticipated the cost it would extract from me. In the pursuit of my revenge, I had isolated myself, pushing away anyone who might have softened the edges of my grief. I had burned bridges just as effectively as I had burned their lives to the ground, and now I was left standing on the ashes, utterly alone. I thought about Frank, how his face had been plastered across the news, his hands cuffed behind his back, his eyes hollow and defeated. He looked like a man who had been broken, who had seen the world he built turn to dust. Lauren had been dragged down with him, her involvement in his financial schemes exposed for everyone to see. She had lost everything, her reputation, her security, her future. The life she thought she would have was gone. And I had watched it all unfold from the sidelines, detached and methodical. But now that it was over, I couldn't escape the feeling that in destroying them, I had destroyed something in myself too. I had turned into someone I didn't recognize. Someone colder, someone crueler. I stood up, setting the empty glass down on the table and walking toward the window. I leaned against the cold glass, staring out at the empty street. A few cars passed by, their headlights casting fleeting beams of light into the darkness, but the neighborhood was quiet, asleep. I envied that kind of peace, that kind of oblivion. I hadn't felt peace in months, maybe longer. The reflection in the window stared back at me, a stranger's face. My own eyes looked foreign to me now, darker, harder. I didn't know who I was anymore. The man who had loved Lauren, who had built a life around her, was gone. In his place stood someone hollowed out by anger, consumed by a need for retribution that had left nothing behind but emptiness. I turned away from the window and walked through the house, the silence following me like a shadow. Every room felt too big, too quiet. The furniture was the same, the walls unchanged, but everything felt different. It was as if the life that had once filled these spaces had been stripped away, leaving only a shell. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where Lauren used to sit, her legs crossed, sipping her coffee. She used to talk about her plans, her dreams, all the things we would do together. But somewhere along the way, those dreams had changed. She had stopped sharing them with me, and I had stopped listening. I hadn't realized how far apart we had drifted until it was too late. I had thought that by taking her down, by destroying her, I would reclaim some part of what I had lost. But now, sitting in the stillness, I realized that what I had lost couldn't be reclaimed. The life we had was gone, and no amount of revenge could bring it back. I felt a deep, aching loneliness settle over me, heavier than anything I had felt before. It was a loneliness that went beyond the physical absence of Lauren. It was the loneliness of knowing that I had become someone I didn't want to be, someone who had let revenge define him. And now, with no one left to fight, no one left to hate, I was left alone with the consequences of my choices. I had won, but at what cost? I stood up and walked back into the living room, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The quiet was deafening, pressing down on me from all sides. I sat on the couch, staring into the darkness, my thoughts circling in endless loops. There was no going back, no undoing what had been done. The path I had chosen had led me here, to this moment, and now I had to live with it. I thought about the man I had been before all of this started. The man who had loved his wife, who had trusted her, who had believed that their life together was real. That man was gone now, replaced by someone colder, harder, someone who had taken justice into his own hands. But the justice I had sought hadn't brought me the peace I had hoped for. It had only left me more alone than I had ever been. I looked down at my hands, my fingers curling into fists, the weight of it all crashing over me. I had wanted revenge. I had wanted to make them pay, and I had succeeded. But in the end, it hadn't brought me anything but emptiness. I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting the silence wash over me. The finality of it all settled in, heavy and undeniable. There was no going back, no reconciliation, no one left to care. The life I had once known was gone, and in its place was this: the quiet, the loneliness, the endless stretch of empty days ahead. I had achieved my revenge, but I had paid a price I hadn't anticipated. I opened my eyes, staring into the darkness, the realization settling over me like a weight I couldn't shake. The ultimate revenge was mine, but so was the loneliness, and I had no one left to share it with.